A scientist is browsing a gift shop, turning over a whale figurine and spots a mistake. Along the leading edge of the flipper, bumps are sticking out. The artist got it wrong. He thinks, any engineer knows, the leading edge of a wing should be smooth. He's about to correct the shopkeeper. Except the artist didn't get it wrong. The scientist went to check and stopped cold. Real humpback whales do have bumps along the leading edge of their flippers. Not on the trailing edge, as every textbook would have it on the front, facing into the flow. Nature seemed to have broken the most fundamental rule of aerodynamics. And somehow, it worked. Here's the remarkable part. Those same bumps are now spinning wind turbines, pushing air through fans, and making both quieter and more efficient. What looked like a carver's blunder became a technology. And it all started with one chance thought in front of a souvenir shelf. This is a story about a moment of curiosity, a biologist with a wonderfully fitting last name, and a 30-ton acrobat of the ocean, about how a humpback whale showed us what a wing should look like, and about how sometimes wrong is just a very well-hidden version of right. First, the whale itself. The humpback is a true giant as long as a bus, weighing over 30 tons. When something that massive launches out of the water, it takes your breath away. You'd think at that size, agility would be out of the question. But agility is exactly its superpower. Despite its bulk, the humpback is extraordinarily maneuverable. It carves tight turns underwater, reverses direction almost on a dime, spirals and dives. For 30 tons, it's like a semi-truck doing ballet. And all of that dancing is in service of one thing, food. The humpback hunts with a trick. It dives below a school of fish and, spiraling upward, releases a ring of bubbles from its blowhole, a living net that herds the fish into a dense column. To carve those tight spirals without spinning out, it needs some very unusual wings. And it has them. The humpback's pectoral flippers are the longest of any whale, nearly a third of its body length. They're true underwater wings. It uses them to stroke, steer, and bank through turns. And right along the leading edge of those wings is the peculiar thing. The leading edge of the flipper isn't smooth. Running along it is a row of large, rounded bumps like knuckles on a clenched fist. In scientific terms, tubercles, 9 to 11 per flipper. A detail almost no one had paid attention to, except one person. Now the rule. Every aerodynamics textbook says, the leading edge of a wing, blade, or fin must be smooth and streamlined. Any roughness on the front is wasted drag, a disruption to the flow. Bumps on the leading edge? You just don't do that. It's practically heresy. The man who noticed the discrepancy is named Frank Fish, a biologist who studies how animals swim. The name seems like destiny, and he's spent his whole career investigating how creatures move through water. And one day, that obsessive attention to detail paid off. It happened in an ordinary little shop. Fish spotted a humpback whale figurine on the shelf. The carver had carefully sculpted the bumps and placed them along the leading edge of the flipper. To a biologist's eye, it was like a red flag. That's not how it works, he thought. And he said what nearly any engineer would have said. The craftsman made a mistake. If bumps belonged anywhere, it was toward the back, along the trailing edge, where aerodynamics at least offered some justification. Up front was no place for them. He was completely certain he was right. To settle it once and for all, Fish checked photographs of real whales and froze. The bumps were exactly where the carver had put them on the front. The sculptor hadn't made a mistake. The mistake belonged to whoever assumed they knew how things were supposed to be. The whale wasn't wrong. The textbook in his head was. And instead of saying, that can't be right, Fish asked the right question. Why? Why would evolution maintain bumps in what seemed like the worst possible position for millions of years? Nature doesn't waste anything. If they're there, there's a reason. And he set out to find it. Start with the basics. A whale's flipper works like an airplane wing. As it moves through water, it generates lift, the same force that keeps a jetliner in the air. Tilt the wing into the flow, and you get a force that pulls you sideways or upward. That's how the whale turns. The key concept here is angle of attack. the angle at which the wing meets the oncoming flow. The steeper you tilt the wing into the water or air, the more lift you get. Want to turn harder? Increase the angle. But there's a limit. For a while, it's a fair trade. A little more tilt, a little more force, a tighter turn. The flow dutifully wraps over the top of the wing, staying attached to the surface. The whale angles the flipper, grabs the force, enters the turn. Until the angle gets too steep. Beyond that limit comes the catastrophe, a stall. The flow can no longer follow the sharply angled wing and tears away from the surface, spinning into chaos. Lift drops suddenly, drag spikes. The wing, as engineers say, stalls. For an aircraft, a stall is an emergency. The plane shudders and drops. For a hunting whale, stalling mid-turn means flying out of the spiral, losing the fish, missing the catch. It desperately needs to carve tight loops without stalling. So how does it manage? This is where the bumps come in. As flow hits the leading edge, they slice it into separate, organized streams, channeling water through the grooves between them. The bumps bring order to the flow, exactly where a smooth wing would lose control. Those streams twist into tight little vortices that run along the surface and press the flow against the flipper, essentially pinning the water to the wing and stopping it from tearing away. Where a smooth leading edge would have already stalled, the bumps keep the flow attached. The payoff: the whale can tilt its flipper at a far higher angle of attack and still not stall. Where a smooth wing would have given up long ago, the bumpy one clings to the flow and keeps pulling. That's the secret to the humpback's tight turns at banks where others would spin out. And here's what breaks the mold. A rough, bumpy leading edge turned out to be better than a smooth one. Not in spite of physics, because of it. We tend to assume smooth always means more streamlined, more efficient. The whale showed us that the right kind of roughness can beat perfect smoothness. This wasn't designed in a lab, it was refined over 50 million years. Every humpback that turned a little more sharply caught a little more food and left a little more offspring. Generation by generation, evolution tuned the flipper long before we built our first wind tunnel. Fish realized that what nature had optimized for hunting could be borrowed for engineering. If bumps help a whale's flipper resist stall, why not put them on our blades? A turbine blade, a fan blade, a propeller. They're all wings, and they all fight the same enemy. In a sense, nature ran this flipper through its own wind tunnel for tens of millions of years. Every generation of whales that turned more sharply caught more fish and raised more calves. Evolution polished the shape of that flipper long before we built our first test facility. And here is Fish's key insight. If tubercles help a whale's flipper resist stall at steep angles, why shouldn't they help our wings too? Blades. Because a turbine blade, or a fan blade, is just a wing that cuts through flow. And there are plenty of those wings all around us. Wind turbine blades, fan blades, aircraft propellers, ship propellers. Everything that spins and pushes through air or water runs into the exact same stall problem as a whale's flipper, and tubercles could help all of them. In 2005, Fish decided to test the idea seriously and founded a company called WhalePower. A dream team came together. Fish himself as the biologist, Philip Watts as the aerodynamics engineer, and Stephen Dewar as the entrepreneur. Biology, physics, and business all gathered around one whale flipper. They did what no one had seriously done before, added a row of tubercles to the leading edge of blades and ran them through a wind tunnel. Smooth blades versus bumpy blades measuring lift, noise, drag. And the numbers were very persuasive. The headline number? Roughly 20% improvement in efficiency. The tubercled blade pulls significantly more from the same flow under the same conditions. 20% is an enormous figure in the world of turbines and fans, where engineers fight for every fraction of a percent. Here, they got 20. For wind turbines, this changes the equation. Tubercled blades harvest more energy from the same wind. The turbine puts out more electricity without growing any larger. Same wind, same tower, more output, all from one row of bumps. And, more importantly, low wind. A smooth blade in gentle wind operates at high angles of attack and stalls easily, the turbine practically stops. A tubercled blade holds the flow and keeps turning where a standard one has already given up. That means the turbine works longer and in far more locations. Then there's noise. Stalling flow creates the turbulence that makes turbines and fans hum and whine. Tubercles smooth the flow and noise drops. Tests showed a reduction of at least 2 decibels. That's audible to the human ear, and for neighbors of wind farms, it's a significant relief. And the hardware lasts longer. When flow breaks up and hammers against a blade, it vibrates and wears. Smooth flow means less shaking. In tests, wear dropped by 6 to 8%, and component lifespan increased by about a quarter. Tubercles don't just add power, they protect the machine. Add it all up: more energy, quieter operation, fewer breakdowns, longer service life. That means cheaper electricity, quieter neighborhoods near turbines, and less frequent maintenance. And none of it comes from an expensive new component. It comes from the right shape on a leading edge. A shape borrowed from a whale. But it doesn't stop at turbines. The same principle moved into industrial and ceiling fans. Large fans in warehouses and barns, fitted with tubercled blades, move more air while consuming less power and making less noise. A quiet revolution, right above our heads. And beyond that, anywhere a blade spins. Cooling fans in electronics, pumps, compressors. Any system that moves air or liquid could benefit from tubercles on the leading edge. One principle, thousands of applications, from massive industrial machines down to tiny computer fans. And let's not forget water, the whale's home element. Hydrofoils on boats, ship propellers, tidal turbine blades, they all battle flow separation too. And tubercles promise the same thing in every case. More thrust, fewer stalls, a smoother ride. The whale is, after all, a specialist in water. And the most exciting frontier is aviation. A wing that flies at higher angles of attack without stalling is potentially safer and more maneuverable. Work is underway. Tubercles are being studied for control surfaces, propellers, and fan blades. The path to commercial airliner wings is cautious, but the door is open. Running through all of these examples is one idea. A row of bumps on the leading edge organizes the flow and pushes stall further away. Control the stall, and you control the wing. That means more force, less noise, and longer life. One trick, multiple gains. To be honest, tubercles aren't a magic bullet for every situation. They work best where a blade is operating near stall at high or variable angles of attack. In a perfectly steady cruise regime, where a smooth blade isn't stalling anyway, the advantage is more modest. This is a tool for a specific job, except that perfect steady-state conditions almost never exist in the real world. Wind gusts, turbulent air, shifting loads, blades are constantly operating off the textbook, and that's exactly the territory where tubercles shine. The real world is essentially one long operation near the edge of stall. And here's the honest conclusion about that textbook rule. The leading edge must be smooth. Wasn't wrong, it was incomplete. For calm, steady flow, it holds. But nature knew the exception that engineers had overlooked. The whale was simply living by a more complete version of aerodynamics. And it got there out of necessity. A whale that stalls mid-turn goes hungry. Miss the school of fish, and you miss dinner. For millions of years, selection kept the whales that turned more precisely and didn't stall. Hunger and hunting carved those tubercles more accurately than any engineer could. And the deepest lesson lives in Frank Fish himself. He was a hairbreadth away from dismissing it. The artist got it wrong, and moving on. But instead of, "That's incorrect," he asked, "Why is it like that?" That tiny difference between mockery and curiosity unlocked an entire technology. Think about it. The answer was sitting right there, in your hand, on a gift shop shelf. In a whale figurine thousands of people had walked past. A 50-million-year-old engineering secret wasn't waiting in a laboratory, it was in an ordinary shop, waiting for someone willing to spend a moment admitting they might be wrong. Here's the thought to leave with. The best ideas often aren't locked away behind closed doors, they're sitting in the open, looking like a mistake. Progress frequently begins not with a brilliant plan, but with the willingness to be surprised by something strange and ask, why? The whale carried the answer on the tip of its flipper for millions of years. All it needed was someone who bothered to notice. A 30-ton giant taught our turbines to catch the wind, and our fans to breathe more quietly, all thanks to a row of bumps that were first dismissed as an error. If stories like this are your kind of thing, there are plenty more ahead. Next time, how shark skin, covered in microscopic teeth, helps them swim faster and resist bacteria. Until then, keep looking at the world around you and asking, why does that work? Thank you for being with us. If you find the idea inspiring that nature is our greatest teacher, share this story with someone who still enjoys being amazed by the world. We're already preparing the next one, because nature still holds so many secrets waiting to be discovered. See you next time. Subscribe.